Shalom, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for How Were Women the Heroines of the Passover Story and What Rituals Have We Taken on to Honor Them with Rabbanit Sharona Halickman. And I want to thank our great partners in Denver, BMHBJ, and pass it over to Rabbi Chaitovsky to introduce today's guest speaker.
Thank you very much, Alex, and welcome everyone. Moed Tov, a happy Pesach to you. We're in for a treat today from Rabbanit Sharona Halickman, who is going to be speaking to us about the heroines of Passover and what we have done and perhaps might yet still do to honor them and give them their full due. She holds a BA in Judaic Studies from Stern College, a master's in Jewish education from the Azrieli School at Yeshiva University, and she has the distinction of being the first Orthodox woman to serve as a member of clergy, as the first Congregational Intern and Madricha Ruchanit spiritual guide at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale. She made aliya in 2004 and promptly founded Torat Reva Yerushalayim, a nonprofit educational organization based in Jerusalem, which provides Torah study groups for students of all ages and backgrounds. I'm delighted to turn the program over to today's wonderful scholar, Rabbanit Sharona Halickman.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for hosting me. So today we're going to talk about the heroines of the story of the Exodus and how we can include what they've contributed into our Passover holiday to enhance it, and also to, when you look at the Haggadah, you see that the women are not focused on, and I think this is really the time to give credit where credit is due. So we're gonna look at a few different women. There are many women in the story of the Exodus. We're not going to get to all of them. We're going to highlight a few of them, and also we're going to highlight some rituals that maybe you've heard of, and some ideas that I have for maybe some rituals that we can come up with together. Okay, so we're going to start with the Gemara in Sota, in the Talmud, and it says, Darash Rav Avira, B'schar nashim tzidkaniyot shayu be'oto hador nigalu Yisrael miMitzrayim. It's because of the merit of these righteous women that were in the generation of the Exodus that the Jewish people were brought out of Egypt. It was in the merit of these specific women. So now the question is going to be, who were these women? And I'm sure everybody has ideas that they could think of. There's of course the midwives that saved the babies. There's Moshe's mother. There's Miriam, his sister. There's Pharaoh's daughter who rescued him. Right? There's so many women. But we're also going to see that there's some unnamed women, the women behind the scenes that made sure that the Jewish people kept reproducing. So what did they do to make sure that their husbands would want to continue having children with them? Because don't forget, they were doing back-breaking labor all day. And then at night, they're tired. So what are the women going to do? So when the women would go down to get the water, so God would make sure that there were small fish that would also get into their pitchers, and this way they would be able to bring out fish and water. So then they would take these pitchers, they would heat up the water, and then they would bring it to their husbands. They were in the fields. And then they would wash their husbands, and they would anoint them. And then they would feed them. So they really, what do we say? What's the expression up until today? The way to a man's heart is through his stomach, right? So they would make sure that he felt nice and clean and relaxed, and then they would give him a good meal. And this way he would want to sleep with her. And this is how Bnei Israel continue to reproduce. Okay, now there's another aspect also, right? When a woman wants to look good for her husband, right? She also wants to do it. She wants to look good, but how is she going to know if she looks good if she doesn't have a mirror? So there's also this concept of the mirrors. And I think that one idea that you can save for next year for your Seder is to put mirrors around on the table. And people can ask, why are there mirrors here? And then you'll be able to answer why by looking at what we're going to look at now. So it says specifically in Shemot, when Bnei Israel were already in the desert and they were contributing to the Mishkan, to the tabernacle. They gave in their mirrors. Okay, right? We know they gave gold, silver, they gave clothing, they gave materials, all kinds of things, but they also gave in their mirrors. As it says in Shemot chapter 38, Vayasa takiyor nechoshet. Okay, so the laver, right, the sink, was made out of, for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle, was made out of nechoshet, out of copper. Right, the whole thing was made of copper. They were made from these mirrors that the women who were waiting outside of the tent of meeting gave in. Okay, so this just seems very strange. Like, what's going on here, right? So Rashi says, what were these mirrors that the women crowded to give in? Right, sovot sounds like tzavah, like the army. The young women, right, the women of Israel had mirrors that they took out of Egypt with them, right? When they're rushing out, right, we think of the tambourines, which we'll see soon, and we think of the matzah, and they're grabbing their kids, and they're grabbing their stuff, and they're grabbing the gold and the silver and everything. They also took their mirrors with them. Right, certainly there was nowhere to buy anything once they got out. So whatever they had, right? So what did they do it then? They had they would look in these mirrors when they were putting on their makeup, when they were putting on their jewelry. But when it was time to build the tabernacle and materials were needed, they didn't mind giving up even these mirrors that made them know how good they were. Now, Moshe did not really want to accept these mirrors because he found it was frivolous, right? He felt that they were just made for the evil inclination. God said, no, accept these mirrors. I love these mirrors more than anything else. Because of these mirrors, the women were able to give birth to this huge amount of kids in Egypt. Okay, so now the story that we just saw before from the Gemara is repeating itself again, right? That the husband worked really hard. Right? Then they would bring food and drink for their husbands. And they would feed them and they would look in the mirrors. And she would see herself with her husband in the mirror. She said, oh, I'm better looking than you, right? And then, being playful about it. And this way, the husbands would get interested in them. And this way, they would sleep together and they would be pregnant. It was all because of these mirrors that got them interested. Right? And it says that under the apple tree, that's where I woke you up. That's in Shir Hashim, which you're going to be reading this Shabbat. And these are the mirrors that were holy because these women were able to have so many kids because of these mirrors, and therefore it was appropriate that they used them in the tabernacle. Okay, and the women literally came in crowds to bring them, right? Which is huge because it's not like they could be that they could be replaced. Okay, so the first group, I would say, the first women that really helped ensure the Exodus were the women that don't have the names. They're just the regular women that use their mirrors, use their pitchers to bring up the water and the fish, and made sure to keep having children. So that's why if you want to put out mirrors, even over the rest of the holiday, put mirrors on the table this Shabbat and see what people think if they know the story. Okay, so now we have another woman. Okay, we have Miriam. Okay, and many of you may have heard of this custom of having a Miriam's cup at the Seder. And basically, the Miriam's cup came originally out of the original feminist Seders, and I think that they've moved now to more mainstream Seders as well. And the idea of the Miriam's cup is instead of putting wine or grape juice as we do in Eliyahu's cup, you put water to remember Miriam. And we're going to see why the water is linked to Miriam. Okay, so we see in the Gemara and Megillah that there were 7 prophetesses. Okay, it's pretty impressive that in the days of the Gemara, they're recognizing that there were 7 female prophets. And some of them actually, they have to kind of pull it together. It's a little bit far-fetched how they get to these 7. Okay, so who are they? Sheva Niviot Ma'anin. Who are they? Sarah, Miriam, Devorah, Hannah, Abigail, Huldah, and Esther. Okay, and then the Gemara is going to go into why each one. We're just going to focus on Miriam because she's the one that's from our story. And it says Miriam diktiv, why Miriam? Vatikach Miriam haniviyah achot Aharon. Okay, so it actually says in the text that Miriam was a prophetess. She was the sister of Aaron, and she took her timbrel. Right, this is when they're when they were saved, and then they start dancing. Okay, so with Miriam, we actually see in the text in the Chumash that she was a prophetess. With some of the other ones, we don't. For example, Sarah, you don't find anywhere that she was a prophetess in the text, only in the Gemara. Same with Hannah, etc. But with Miriam, she's specifically considered a prophetess, but it seems a little bit strange because she's called Achot Aharon. She's called the sister of Aaron, which seems really strange because Moshe is the famous one in the story of the Exodus, right? Think about it. You're walking down the street today. You say, okay, it's Passover. I'm going to ask people on the street who the most, important character in that story of the Exodus is. Most people are going to tell you that it was Moshe, right? You say Aaron. They say, oh yeah, the brother. I kind of remember him from the Ten Commandments movie or something, but everybody knows Moshe. Everyone knows Moses. So why is she called Achot Aharon and not Achot Moshe? So the full verse in Shemot is Vatikach Miriam Haniviyah, Miriam the prophetess, Achot Aharon, the sister of Aaron, took, right, et hatov biyada, she took the drum or the tambourine in her hand, but tetzeena kol hanashim achareya b'tupim ub'macholot, and all the women danced after her with drums and with timbrels. V'tan lahem Miriam, and Miriam answered them, Shiru laHashem ki ga'o ga'as dus rachmo rama bayam. She chanted the same words that we see Moshe singing in the beginning of the Az Yashir song. She is now leading that with the women. Okay, so this is very complex here because first of all, we have a few things. First of all, we have the idea that the women realized, led by Miriam, realized that they're going to be saved. They already knew, they had that feeling we're going to be saved, and therefore we're going to take the instruments out. Right? They had that belief that we're going to be redeemed. Okay, so that's one thing. And we also have this idea that the women, just as the men were singing with each other, the women were also singing and dancing with each other. Rabbi Saul Berman actually proposed at the first Orthodox Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance conference in 1987. Rabbi Saul Berman actually said to add, when you say Az Yashir, when you say the prayer, the Song of the Sea, every morning, to add these two lines at the end, right, which come exactly right after in the Chumash to show that the women were also part of it. It doesn't make sense that the prayer is cut short right before we hear about Miriam. So that's something you can add in for every day of the year, not just for Pesach. Okay, so now we come back to the question, but what made her the Neviah? What was she a prophetess because she knew to take out the instruments, or was there something deeper there? Because taking out the instruments doesn't seem like prophetic, it just kind of seems like, hoping for a better future kind of thing. So the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav, Shaita mitna bat shehi achot Aaron. Okay, why is she called Aaron's sister? Because she was the prophetess when she was Aaron's sister before Moshe was born, right? Because there's Miriam, she was 5 years old, Aaron was 3 years old, and Moshe ends up being born. So he's the baby. So what did she say when she was prophetess? What was her prophecy? Omeret atida imi sheteled ben sheyoshia Yisrael. I know, okay, that my mother is going to have a child, a boy, and he's going to be the leader of Israel. So when he was born, wow, it was a miracle, right? The whole house was filled with light. Her prophecy came true. Amad Avia v'nashka Rosha, her father kissed her on the head. Amar Lavitini Taimani. Your prophecy came true. But then when they had to put him in the basket and put him into the Nile, right? It wasn't that they just threw him in the way that the command was, but they actually put him into the basket, hoping that somehow he would be saved. Amad Avia v'tapka Rosha. Then her father hit her on the head. Now where's your prophecy, my daughter? Right here you're supposed to, say that he's going to be leader, but we're going to have to throw him into the Nile. Then what's going to happen? So then it says that the sister stood from afar, ladea, to know. Okay, it doesn't say ladat, which normally would be the Hebrew. It says ladea, how is her prophecy going to end, right? Why is she standing there in that famous picture where she's standing by the bulrushes to see what's happening? Why is she standing there? To see what's going to be the end of the prophecy. Okay, now of course we know the end, that Pharaoh's daughter comes along and Miriam makes the deal, and then Yocheved, the mother, is able to nurse him, and then he does end up being the leader in the end. Now we have in Shemot, at the beginning of the book of Shemot, in chapter 2, we have a very strange situation. Okay, we have, first of all, there's no names here. It says Vayelech ish mi beit Levi, vayikach ifat Levi. A man from the house of Levi got married to a daughter of Levi, right? So that they're all in the same family, but we don't have their names. We don't have their first name. Batar Haisha, the woman was pregnant, Batel Ben, and she gave birth to a boy. Bateroto ki tofu, she saw he was good, but titzpineu shlosha yerachim, and she hid him for 3 months. We don't have any names here at all. Okay. Below yachla od hatzpino, she couldn't hide him anymore. But tikachlo tevat gomesh, she took a basket, but timchara b'chamar b'zep, she put some stuff on it to make sure that it would be waterproof. Batasem bar hayeled, batasem basuf al svar hayor, and she put him into this basket into the Nile. Now, one idea of why there's there are no names here, which I believe, is that they were not the only family. Moshe's family was not the only family that had this idea to put the baby in the basket and see what was going to happen. A lot of families probably said, you know what, why not take a chance? Better we put him in the basket, see if he's saved, rather than take a chance that he's for sure going to be dead. So that's one idea. Another idea is that for some reason it's a little bit secretive at the beginning. Okay, and why is it secretive? We see the continuation. But so the baby's sister is standing there to see what's going to happen to him. But or Pharaoh's daughter comes to wash herself. Or her helpers are with her. Right, she sends her servant to go in and get the baby. So the Gemara in Sota wants to try to figure out what's going on, that this man from the house of Levi marries a woman from the house of Levi. Why don't we know their names? Why are they getting married? What's going on? Okay. So the Gemara says, where did he go? Amar Ravi Yehuda Bar Zavina, Shalach Beitzat Bito. He went following his daughter's recommendation. Okay, why? What happened? Amram Gadol Hadoraya, the father who's going to end up being Moshe's father. He's already Miriam's father and Aaron's father. Gadol Hador, he was, the head of the generation. When he saw that Pharaoh said, okay, every boy has to be thrown into the Nile. Right? Why should we bother having kids? Right, if they're just going to have to be thrown into the Nile. So he divorced his wife. They all ended up getting divorced because he said, well, why bother having kids if we're going to have to throw them in? His daughter says to him, Abba, you're even worse than Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh only said to throw the boys in, right? By not having any kids at all, there's going to be no boys and no girls. So you're even worse than Pharaoh. Pharaoh's decree is only for this world, but yours is for this world and for the next one, right? Because God forbid a baby dies, right? They're still going to go to the next world. If there's no one at all, then there's nobody at all. And then she continued, Pharaoh, we don't know if his decree is going to happen or not, because, for example, in 9 months, a lot can change, right? He may be out of a job. His son may take over. Who knows what? Right? Your decree, because you're such a good person, you're such a righteous person, there's more of a chance that your decree is going to happen than Pharaoh's. So then they all, Ahmad, he got up and he got remarried, and then everybody else did the same thing, and they also got remarried. So what is this? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Bar Zavina, Shasalom Maseh Likuchin. So they did a real marriage ceremony. Hoshiva ba'apirion ba'aron Miriam radim lefanea malachei hasharet amru ema banim smecha. So the kids were at the wedding because it was the second wedding of the parents, and therefore the kids were dancing and the angels were dancing, and that's how this couple got married again, and that's how the daughter was already born. Okay, now Miriam, because of what she did here, right? This idea that she had this prophecy, she went to see it through. She went to tell Pharaoh's daughter what the to arrange. She spoke to Pharaoh's daughter to arrange that there would be the nursemaid. This way, her mother was able to take care of the baby. Right? She did all the behind the scenes stuff. Okay, and the fact that she waited to see is something that's going to be rewarded later. As it says in Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, "Vatisager Miriam michutz lamachana shivat yamim, va'am lo nasa ad hasef Miriam." Okay, so when Miriam spoke lashon hara, right, she spoke gossip about Moshe with her brother Aaron. Okay, she got tsarat, which some explain as something that looks like leprosy. She was sent out for 7 days, and the whole nation waited for her for 7 days. So Rashi explains, they didn't travel. God gave her this honor because she waited an hour approximately, right, for Moshe to be found by Pharaoh's daughter. So for 1 approximate hour, the entire nation waited for her for 7 days. She was rewarded much more. Okay, so it says in the Gemara in Sota, Miriam himtina lemoshe shachat shenemar v'titzatzev achot hamirachot lefichach nitakvu la Yisrael shiba yamim b'midbar shenemar va'am lo nasa ad hasef Miriam. So Rashi took it from this Gemara in Sota, and they all waited for her. Okay, so we see that Miriam is connected to water because the baby was put into the water and she saved him from being drowned in the water and all that stuff. But there's more to that, why Miriam is connected with water. In Bamidbar, we see Vayavo b'nei Yisrael kol ha'ida midbar Tzin. The whole nation got to midbar Tzin, the desert of Tzin. B'chodesh harishon v'yashev ha'am b'kadesh v'tamacha Miriam b'tikaber sham. So Miriam died there. V'lo hayamayim la'ida v'yikalu al Moshe al Aaron. All of a sudden, okay, this is almost 40 years they're in the desert. They had water the whole time. All of a sudden, she died, and there's no water. So we see that there's a connection between the water and with Miriam, the water that they drank in the desert. So we find in the Gemara and Tanit, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Shlosha Parnasim Tovim Amdu L'Israel. So there were 3 sustainers in Israel. Elahen, Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. The 3 sustainers are Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. V'shalosh matanot tovot nitnu al yadam. There were 3 gifts that were given because of them. Ve'eluhen, be'er, a well, anan, cloud, and the manna. Be'er biskut Miriam. The well was because of Miriam. The anan, the cloud, biskut Aaron for Aaron, and the manna was in the honor of Moshe. Meta Miriam. Now, when Miriam died, nistaleka be'er. Then the water from the well disappeared. Shenemar v'tamat sham Miriam v'kativ batre v'lo hayamayim la'ida v'chazra b'skut shnehem. And then later it came back because of Moshe and Aaron. But really the well was because of Miriam. So we put water into the Miriam's cup. It's really to remind us that the water stayed with Bnei Israel in the desert the whole time on account of her, as well as the idea that she took care of the baby Moshe to see what was going to happen. Okay, so now we get to an interesting idea, okay, which is that after we saw at the beginning that women were the ones that the Exodus basically took place because of them. Because if they didn't have all the children, who would have left Egypt, right? And of course, if we didn't have Moshe, right, who would have been the leader? So the women were definitely instrumental here. But we see that Nashim Chayavot Ba'arba Kosar Halalu. It says in the Gemara Pesachim, the women are obligated in the 4 cups of wine. Sha'af Hen Hayu Botonis, because they too were involved in the miracle. Now we have a principle which is about time-bound mitzvah, right? A mitzvah that's at a certain time. Many of them women are exempt from. It often says they're always exempt, but in the end, there are very few mitzvot that they actually are exempt from, but they're the ones that are positive time-bound mitzvah. So drinking a cup of wine at the Seder is a positive time-bound mitzvah. Okay. But they are obligated in it. Why? Because women were involved. So the Tosfot ask how they were involved in this miracle, because the Rashbam says, Sha'al Yadam Nigalu. Okay, because of the women, they were redeemed, which is what we just saw in the text, right? And now there's two other holidays where we also say that women are obligated because they were part of the miracle. One is Hanukkah, which is because of Yehudit, right? She killed the enemy. And the other one is Esther with Purim, that obviously Esther saves the day in the Megillah. Okay, so okay, but then Tosfot saying, but this is difficult. What the Rashbam saying is difficult, because Rashbam is saying that women were the heroines. Yes, we have Yehudit, Judith, we have Esther, we have all these women that we just mentioned in the Exodus story. But the way that the wording is said, it says, they too were part of the miracle. It doesn't sound like the women were the heroines. It sounds like, oh yeah, they were also involved. Not yes, they were the heroine. Okay, so Tosfot says Vikasha, it's difficult. It sounds like they're not the important ones. In the Jerusalem Talmud, it says that they were in the same danger. Right? In the Purim story, right? We didn't read this that long ago. The Purim story, Haman wanted to kill everybody, men, women, children. It didn't matter, right? And the same thing with in the story of the Exodus, right? The women were also slaves. The women were also stuck in Egypt doing the backbreaking work. And in the story of Hanukkah, right, there was this idea that the night before a girl got married, one of the generals would come and rape her, right? So they were in danger in all of these stories as well. Okay, but then we say, wait a minute. But what about so maybe it was just because they were in danger, not because they were the heroines, right? And also in the mitzvah of sukkah, right? Sitting in the sukkah on Sukkot, right? Women are actually exempt from that because that is a biblical mitzvah. Okay, and these time-bound mitzvot are the ones that women are exempt from are biblical. But in the drinking of the 4 cups of wine, that's d'Rabbanan, that's rabbinic. That was also for the women because they were part of that miracle, and the rabbis instituted this. Okay, and we see in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, sarich lishtot arba kosot al haseder. Now, it's not just showing up at the Seder, drinking 4 cups and leaving. Okay, but it's al haseder as part of the Seder meal. Okay. You can't just show up, drink the 4 and leave. It has to be done al haseder, which the Mishnah Berurah explains. Sheyomar Haggadah ben time. You have to actually read the Haggadah, which means that that if there's a woman in the family that went to go put her baby to sleep or went to go check on what's going on in the kitchen or whatever it is, and she had to get up for a minute, everybody should wait for her because she's supposed to be involved in the entire Seder as well, and not just in the eating and the drinking. And the Shulchan Aruch continues, the women are involved in the 4 cups of wine, but when the Gemara says 4 cups of wine, it doesn't just mean 4 cups of wine, it means all of the mitzvot of that night, which means reading Haggadah, eating the matzah, eating the maror, etc. So now we get to the question of what about misubin? What about leaning? Okay, right there. There's this concept of leaning so that we would be like royalty, like free people, right? We even sing in our Haggadah, right? We sing the Manish Shana, right? It's fresh in your minds. It was just a couple of days ago, right? On other nights, we lean, we don't lean, we recline, we don't recline. On this night, we all recline. It doesn't say the men recline. It doesn't say only the men recline. It says we all recline. But what's very interesting is that's the Haggadah that we have today. But in the Mishnah, the original Haggadah, right, that misubin was not there. The 4 questions were different, right? It's kind of like when you make a list of the 613 mitzvot in the Torah, right? So you have the Rambam, the Maimonides has his list, the Ramban, Nachmanides has his list. Just because we say 613 doesn't mean everyone agrees on the 613. So the 4 questions as well. Originally, Mesubin was not there. The leaning was not in the original Haggadah mentioned in the Mishnah. Rather, it was Shevachol Elot Anochlin Basar Tzali Shaluk Umebushal Halayla Zeh Kulo Tzli. So what happened in the original list? The Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, was mentioned. Now, once we no longer had the Paschal Lamb, they decided that it was better to take that one out and actually put something that we see at the Seder. So they threw in Mesubin. So we already see that the leaning is not as important as, chametz and matzah and maror, right? And those, but it's still made the cut for the 4 questions that we have now. Okay, so the question is, what is this leaning? Because today we don't lean in general, right? Rich people, poor people, it doesn't matter. Nobody's leaning in a regular meal, okay? And even the king and queen, now we have a king in England, right? I don't know if he's leaning. He probably, when he sits for his meal, he's sitting maybe in a more comfortable chair, but he's not leaning like on a couch like they used to do in the old days. Okay. So the Ra'avan says Shekachaya derech sarim ubnei chorim. The leaning was what the monarchs and the free people used to do. B'yamecha chachamim lasev al hamitot umotim al tzad small b'ochlin. They would lie down on these bed-like couches, and they would lean towards the left side when they ate. So the idea was, because these important people were doing that, so too, when we had our Seders, we should copy them and feel that it's true freedom, that we can act like those leaders. So the Ravan already in the 12th century is saying, but you know what? We don't need to do that anymore because our leaders are already not doing it, right? So even in the 12th century, they're already finished with that. Okay, so the Raviyah, 12th, 13th century says, in our day where it's not common to lean, you can actually just sit regular because nobody does that anymore, right? This is already the 12th and 13th centuries that it was already not common to lean for anybody. Okay, so then the Gemara Psachim talks about different ways, going back now to the Gemara, different ways that would be considered reclining and wouldn't be. So lying on one's back is not reclining, right? Reclining to the right is not reclining, okay? And why is that? Because you could choke on your food, right? It'll go into the wrong spot. So the real leaning was leaning to the left. Okay. Now this is the important part of the Gemara that has to do with the women. Okay. Isha etza ba'ala lo baya haseba. Okay. If a woman is with her husband, she shouldn't lean. Okay. If she's important, though, she should lean. Okay, so this is very interesting. Okay, so now we're skipping to the 16th century, right? In the 12th and 13th centuries, they said nobody needs to lean, but now we're going to the 16th century, to the Shulchan Aruch. Anyone who is required to recline, if he eats or drinks without reclining, he has not fulfilled his obligation and is required to eat and drink again while reclining. So the Shulchan Aruch is taking this very seriously. This is the code of Jewish law, that you should recline, and if you did the Seder without reclining, you didn't fulfill your obligation. And the Ramah, which is the Ashkenazic posek, the law that we follow for the Ashkenazim, and there are those who say that in our times, where it is not customary to recline, one can rely ex post facto on the opinion of the Raviyah that he has fulfilled his obligation without the recline. Okay, so what we see here is, yes, you're supposed to recline, but because in the 12th and 13th centuries they talked about maybe nobody needs to recline, he's saying if you forgot to recline, you don't have to worry because some people said you don't have to recline. Okay, so then it says, it appears to me that if he did not drink the 3rd cup or the 4th while reclining, he should not drink again, right? Because then it's going to look like you're going to have had 6 cups, right? The first 2 you could repeat because people drink extra during the meal. But the last 2, right, after the Afikomen, right, we're only spoke, right, once the meal's over, it's serious to just have the last 2 cups and nothing else. It wouldn't make sense to repeat that and just to be able to recline another time. So then we have the Sheiltot. Okay, so this is in the 8th century. Okay, Lo dirka dinashi lemizga, right? So it's not customary for women, single or married, to recline, right? As they generally don't eat in that manner. But if she's important, she is obligated to recline. So we see this again, this idea of an important woman, right? Okay, so we're going to get to this in a minute. What makes an important woman? The Rashbam says, okay, so because the Rashbam says that a woman won't recline because she kind of has the fear of her husband, right? Because the women were subordinate to their husbands in those days, so it wouldn't make sense for her to recline. But the Mordechai in the 13th century says, but if she's important, she has to recline. Okay, so what does he say? He brings the Tosfot, okay? Because all the women are important, right? Everybody's in Isha Kashuba. So if it's a place where the men are reclining, then the women also should recline, because today all of our women are important, right? If we're talking about a place where nobody reclines, then fine, then it's understandable if the man doesn't recline, the woman's not going to recline. But in a place where the men are reclining, the women are important as well. And then the Kesef Mishnah brings a few choices in the name of Rav Manoach of what an Isha Chashuva would be. And I think once we see the list, I think all the women here will find that they're at least in one of these categories. So the first one is She'en la bal v'hi gveret habayit. So she's not married, so she's the head of the household. Okay. The second one is Shehi Chashuva b'priyadea. She's important from the work that she does. So that could be if she's an artist, if she's a musician, if she's a teacher, whatever it is, that she has something to show for her own work, okay? Or Bat Gedolei Hador, that she's the daughter of one of the heads of that generation, right? For example, in Israel, we have Rav Ovadia Yosef's daughter, right? She's the daughter of an important person. Esher Chayil, a woman of valor, right? When you look at the list in Mishlei, in Proverbs that we read every Friday night, right? The list in Esher Chayil does not mean that every woman has to do everything on that list, right? If you read through the list, you can find something that you do that makes you an Esher Chayil. The idea of Esher Chayil is that the community of all Jewish women make up the entire list of Esher Chayil. And the next one is Yirat Hashem, God-fearing, right? She feels the awe of God. The third option is Isha Chashuva sheyesh la avadim u'shpachot. She has servants, she has maids. She'ina tzricha litasek b'tikun hamachal b'inyanei habayit. She doesn't have to do the all the household duties. Okay, so she can really relax because she doesn't have to worry about all this stuff. Okay, and I think today we can even say that even if you don't have servants, certainly somebody that's at a hotel and everyone's taking care of everything, great. Somebody that's at, the relatives and the relatives taking care of it, great. But really, if we think of everybody in the family, and keep this in mind for next year, if everybody in the family can help out, right? At the beginning of the Seder, everybody can put out the stuff that we need for the beginning, right? And then you really only need, once the meal comes along, to bring out the things for the meal. And everybody gets up to wash their hands. Everybody can bring in a dish, a pot, a pan, whatever it is. And there's no reason that she has to be the only one doing all the work. And the same is true for the cleanup. So the Gra, the Vilna Gaon, says, of Kol Hanashim, right, they're all important. Katav B'Shem Harav Manoch, Isha Kashuva she'ein tzarach litasek b'tzarchei habayit b'tikun hamachal. Right, so he's very into that last one, which is she doesn't have to worry about any household duties. She doesn't have to worry about the food. So she can really just sit back like a free person because she's not concerned. Like if you go to a restaurant, you don't have to start worrying about what's going on in the kitchen. So same idea. Now then he says, Bizman hazeh she'ein akshav derech harut she'ein hamlachim akshav regilim lahaseh. He's saying, but you know what? Today, none of the kings are doing that either, right? None of the kings are leaning. And he said, you know what? We saw already the Shiltot said women don't have to, so there's no reason to recline because it's not the way that the kings do it today. And then the Chafetz Chaim in the Mishnah Berurah says Isha inatzu chasiba distam isha ein darka lesev b'shum. Right, a regular woman doesn't really recline today. It's not what's really done. So we see here that it's possible for a woman to recline if she's an Isha Chashuva, which all of us can fit into one of those categories, that she's an important woman. But because today a lot of people don't lean anyway, in the end, it really comes out to be a woman's choice. And I saw an unfortunate thing. Somebody posted on Facebook that they were very upset. They came back from the Seder, and only the men were allowed to have pillows, and the women were doing the serving, and the women felt uncomfortable, and that they were cut out, and they felt very upset. And it reminded me of Letty Cotton Pogrebin, who was the founder of Ms. Magazine. She was one of the first feminists. Of course, the first feminists were Jewish, of course. And she said that her growing up, her father would be sitting with a big pillow, and he couldn't even get out of his seat from where he was sitting at the table. So all the way in the back, of the table, with reclining, and her mother was running around like a chicken with her head cut off, serving everything. And she said, I don't want to be part of religious Judaism if this is what it's going to be. But the bottom line is that this may be what you see in certain households, but that doesn't mean that that represents Judaism. And we see here that there are choices. And if the men are reclining, certainly the women can recline as well. And if the men don't recline, then, maybe that's not their custom. But if the men are reclining, there's no reason that the women shouldn't be reclining as well. So if you didn't recline this year and you want to recline next year, great. If you don't want to, that's also fine. But we see that Kulanu Misubin, do we all recline? It really depends on the custom, but there is definitely leeway here for the women to recline if that's what they want to do. So I hope that you got some ideas here, putting out the mirrors, putting out the Miriam's cup with water, and taking on really to make sure that the women in the family are there for the entire Seder and that they don't miss out if they have to leave the room. And then reclining with a pillow for those that feel that they want to. So thanks so much, and we can open up for any questions or comments.
Thank you so much. That was a great presentation. And yes, we would love to open it up to questions. If anyone would like to ask, please feel free to raise your hands and we can call on people to unmute, or you can always write things in the chat as well. And another question that came in was, can you give us your drash about the midwives?
Oh, okay. So basically, when Pharaoh told the midwives, right, we're listed with Shiphrah and Puah. Those are the two mentioned in the text in the beginning of the book of Shemot. Pharaoh says, if it's a boy, you kill him, and if it's a girl, you let her live. And the implication was that the midwives should kind of, right, because the infant mortality rate was very high. So the idea was that they would kind of just make believe that the baby died in childbirth, and that way, it wouldn't be a big deal. But of course, the midwives, we don't know if they were Jewish or not. If it says Me'aldot ha'ivriot, they could have been the Hebrew midwives, or they could have been which would have made them Jewish, or the Me'aldot shel ha'ivriot, the women that helped the Jewish women give birth. Okay, so if they were not Jewish, it makes sense for them not to be Jewish, because how could Pharaoh tell a Jewish woman to kill the Jewish babies? But on the other hand, how can he tell a midwife to kill a baby at all? That's their whole job, right? And we see this in Israel. We're midwives. It's not like in the United States where we have an OBGYN, and then some people have midwife. In Israel, everybody gives birth with a midwife. So that's their job. All day they're just helping the women give birth. It's not a job where you can tell somebody to kill the baby. So these women really took it upon themselves to stand up to Pharaoh. And when he saw, of course, that none of the babies were killed, right? All the babies lived, both the boys and the girls. He said, what's going on here? And the midwife said, oh, you know what? The Jewish women are like animals, right? Before they even call us to come, they already gave birth, right? Think about it. Your dog or your cat, they didn't go to the hospital to give birth. They went in Israel, they go into the garbage shed or whatever, and they come out with, eight kittens. So that's basically how they got away with not killing the babies. And that's why after that, the decree was to throw the baby boys into the Nile, because the midwives obviously were not trusted in ruining the lives of these babies.
Thank you. Another question in the chat. Are there Haggadot that emphasize women's contributions?
So there are some feminist Haggadot. I actually haven't seen any or really noticed any, because the way that I build up my classes is I just go back to the original sources. So I don't know if anybody actually put this in an organized way, the way that I did.
Another comment that maybe that means that you need to write a Haggadah.
That's a good idea. It's a very good idea.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rabbanit Halickman. This was a great presentation. It's so great to learn with you. Just want to let everybody know about our next class, which will be on May 2nd at 1 p.m. Pacific time. We'll be learning with Rabbi Chaim Seidler-Feller about this anti-Semitic moment on the college campus. So very timely, unfortunately, talk, but hope you can all tune into that as well. And wishing everybody a very happy Passover and Chag Sameach. And thank you so much.
Chag Sameach. May we see peace in Israel and throughout the world, and may all the hostages come back safe and sound. And I hope that you'll all be able to come to Israel and help us and volunteer and just tour and travel. And I'd love to meet you.
Amen. Thank you so much.